Well, my colleagues Ignatius, Annor and Abby Sun covered the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. They spoke to leaders in politics and the private sector, and I have the pleasure of having them both here with me in studio. Ignatius, Abby, a warm welcome to Straight Talk Africa. First of all, great reporting. There's dozens of countries represented here. It was a lot of work and you did some really fantastic reporting. I, for one, appreciate it. Let's start out here, Ignatius. You really covered the breadth and depth of the summit. What was the main takeaway for you from what you saw and reported on?
So thank you very much, Hayde. So the takeaway is a deep commitment from the U.S. administration right now saying that we do want a partnership with you, and it's what we're calling a 21st partnership with Africa. Not just for Africa, but with Africa. We've seen that your people are the voice for the next decade or more. And we want to be able to give you the resources and the partnership that is needed to ensure that there's massive development on the continent, to ensure that the digital innovation that is driving African economies is moving ahead, to ensure that the youth of the continent is being empowered to make sure that democracy is at the forefront of the growth of the continent, really.
And you know, it might seem like it, but I do pay attention to what our viewers and our listeners and our followers say on social media. I saw a lot of posts talking about trust. Oh, African leaders, don't get into this relationship again. Don't be fooled again. I mean, you know, the continent obviously does not exist in a vacuum. It is important for Africa to engage, or African nations to engage on the international stage. But this issue of trust between the United States, the fact that every so often there's a new administration, where do you take all that commitment and all that energy that you put into one administration when it changes hands and there might be new policies? What do you think was accomplished in terms of that trust gap that was there?
And Hayde, you would agree with me that that is valid. It's the second time we're seeing the summit happen when it was first launched in 2014 under President Barack Obama. But the administration is saying that, look, we're so committed to the extent that we have appointed a special representative who is going to ensure that every paper that was signed, that every commitment that was made will translate from paper into reality. And that's Ambassador Johnny Carson. He's a man that President Biden described as a man with deep respect for the African continent. And when they talk about what he's done over the continent, from East Africa to West Africa to Southern Africa, he knows the continent very well and wants to ensure that we're not just going to have a talk or billions of dollars will be signed on paper, but at the end of the day, that whatever is committed translates to reality to impact the lives of people. I spoke to the State Department yesterday asking when is Ambassador Carson taking, the role, and they said that very soon. There is not a date yet, but the first commitment of announcing his nomination is critical. So very soon, he should be ensuring that all the 3 days event that we saw brings real change into the lives of Africans.
Well, it's good to put a person in charge of actually making some of these commitments a reality. Abby, you spoke to many folks in the private sector. What were they telling you, and what was sort of their assessment of what they saw and heard at the summit?
I think I was definitely second Ignatius. It is a successful event because many people from the private sectors came to the United States in Washington, D.C. They have a clear goal. Who are they going to meet? Who are they trying to connect with, right? So whether it's government officials in their own country, in their fellow countries and on the continent, or they're trying to find partnership in the United States. So with that clear goal, many private sectors companies were able to connect to those people, because imagine if they were in their own country, how is it possible to talk to 5 or 7 minister-level government officials in 3 days? It's impossible. So I would say for them, it's a very successful one. And also, some people told me, in the past, those kind of conferences, you talk big. A lot of people talk very broad, abstract concept. But this is actually the first one. People start realizing, they invited private sectors entities who really had years of experience on the ground. They start talking about, specific solutions to very core challenge on the continent. So I think from the private sector, I would say it's a very positive experience.
And so, Abby, $55 billion, do folks in the private sector think that is enough? Do they think there's opportunity for them and for the broader U.S. Africa business relationship?
I think it's a good start, right? Because one, this is the first time after 8 years from the Obama administration, that the first time the U.S. government starts showing some sincere commitment. So this $55 billion, we have a breakdown, right? So there are 4 different sectors as a focus. One is healthcare, $20 billion going to healthcare. And especially after the pandemic, out of the pandemic, that's number 1 core sector people are talking about. Second, climate change, right? Climate justice, especially after COP27. And then many countries on the continent started to make the pledge that we're going to figure out sustainable solution for our energy needs. And there's a women partnership, right? How do we engage more women on the continent to contribute in this economic growth? So I think it's a good start. And a very interesting point is, there's so much we talk about being discussed in a whole week-long conference, but there's so much more to do. One of the roundtable investment I attended from Kenya, the President William Ruto said there are going to be a foreign investment conference happening in Nairobi by the end of the March. So there will go be a partnership who led the delegation from the United States. And he said himself, William Ruto himself said he will start a foreign investment committee and he will chair that committee himself. So I think that's some level of commitment people start showing. And from both sides, there's still much work to do.
Ignatius, Abby was talking about who was invited. With these summits, it's always interesting to see who shows up and who doesn't. And the U.S. did come under criticism for hosting some leaders from, let's say, less democratic societies and some just authoritarian regimes. How did all of that play out in terms of who was invited and who wasn't? And then at the same time, who actually showed up?
And before that, Hayde, and just to add on to the $55 billion, on the second day of the forum, there was the U.S. Africa Business Forum. And at that particular event, we had President Biden announced actually a little over $15 billion more that would also cut across various sectors. You talk about tackling food insecurity. There's a $2.1 billion Africa food aid. There's the energy crisis as well. So that's also adding on to the $55 billion that was made. And back to your question now, indeed, the government invited 49 African heads of state. It says that right now, we're only giving invitation to states that are in good standing with the African Union, which is the 54 nation bloc. And so it excluded Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and then Mali because of political instability. It also says that we do not recognize Somaliland as a state and we do not have diplomatic relations with Eritrea. So those states are out. Now, it doesn't mean that we are not, stretching an arm to the state to say that do better and then we'll recognize your contribution and be able to partner with you as we try to foster a new relationship with the African continent. So out of the 49 that were invited, 45 were present. South Sudan's president delegated his foreign minister, as was South Africa as well. You know what Cyril Ramaphosa has been dealing with. So he wasn't able to be there. Now, state officials are saying that when these guys come, we also have the hard conversations about what are you doing with governance, with human rights abuses? Yesterday, the State Department told me we have designated Mali, Burundi, and other states for, the kind of abuses that they're doing to their people.
And of course, that is always the challenge when you are dealing with an entire continent. Everybody does not have the same ideas about what works and what they want in their society or how they will lead anyway. But I do appreciate the two of you coming here and giving us a little bit of a wrap. VOA journalist Ignatius Annor and Abby Sun, thank you so much. And you can find more of their reporting on voaafrica.com. We're going to take a short break.